Hey guys, tonight we slip into the muddy, candlelit world of medieval Europe, where you're not just anyone, you're a woman, and trust me, that's a rough draw. Picture this, you wake on a straw mattress, the air thick with smoke from a dying fire, your fingers already aching from yesterday's chores. Outside, pigs snort in the muck, and the village buzzes with gossip and church bells. Being a woman here isn't just hard, it's a daily grind that'll test your soul. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive this, at least not without some serious grit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love knowing where you're drifting off from. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in a small village, maybe 1340, and life as a woman is like playing a game rigged against you. Your character in this story isn't a person, it's a single, stubborn, threadbare shawl you wear every day. It's rough, patched, and smells faintly of sweat and herbs. But it's yours, a quiet symbol of your endurance. Right now, it's draped over your shoulders as you haul water from a well, the rope biting your palms. The shawl snags on a splintered bucket, but you tug it free. It's not much, but it keeps you warm, hides your face from leering men, and holds your secrets like the dried lavender sprig you tucked inside for luck. Life starts at dawn. You're up before the roosters, kindling the fire, kneading dough, and scrubbing pots with sand because soap's a luxury. Your hands are cracked, your back screams, but stopping isn't an option. Women here are expected to keep the household running, no questions asked. A mainstream fact, most medieval women spent their lives in domestic labor, tied to home and hearth, with no legal rights to own land or earn wages independently. If you're lucky, you're a peasant's wife, not a serf bound to a lord's whim, but even free women are chained by custom. Your husband, if you have one, owns everything, including you. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women used crocodile dung mixed with honey as a contraceptive paste. Smeared. Well, you can guess where. Sounds gross, but it was their desperate bid for control in a world where pregnancy could be a death sentence. Historians still argue whether this actually worked or just made things worse. Imagine the smell, you though. Stick to your shawl, wrapping it tighter as you trudge to the market. The village square is chaos. Merchants hawk wilted cabbages, kids steal apples, and a toothless crone mutters about omens. You barter a few eggs for salt, dodging the butcher's crude jokes about your fine figure. As if you've got time for flattery. Your day's relentless. You mend clothes, churn butter, and chase chickens before their dinner. The shawl's your shield. Flung over your head when the priest glares, you're supposed to be modest. After all, by noon, you're exhausted. But there's no Netflix to zone out with. Instead, you're stuck listening to your neighbor drone on about her gout. You crack a joke about her foot looking like a dragon's claw, and she cackles. Laughter's rare, so you savor it. But as the sun dips, you feel the weight of tomorrow's tasks. The shawl's fraying at the hem now, like your patience. You're not just surviving, you're fighting to keep a spark of yourself alive. The church looms over the village, its shadow a reminder of the rules you can't escape. You're expected to pray, obey, and stay invisible. But as you kneel on cold stone, the shawl slips, and you wonder, is there a way to bend this world to your will? That's a dangerous thought, one you tuck away like that lavender sprig. For now, you endure, but the grind's only beginning. What's it like when every hour demands more of your soul? You're back in the grind, the shawl clinging to your shoulders like a tired friend. Dawn's barely cracked the sky, and you're already knee-deep in chores that'd make a modern gym rat cry. Your hands, rough as tree bark, wrestle with a loom, spinning wool into thread that's never quite even. The village hums with the same old rhythm, Carts creak, dogs bark, and somewhere a baby wails. That shawl, patched and fraying, catches on a splinter as you haul firewood. You curse under your breath, then glance around. Good thing the priest didn't hear. Being a woman here means every move's watched, every mistake judged. The weight of it all settles in your bones, heavier than the logs you're stacking. Your day's a blur of domestic drudgery. You sweep dirt floors, churn cream into butter, and scrub linens in a stream so cold it stings. A mainstream fact: medieval women spent up to 12 hours daily on household tasks, often while pregnant or nursing. No sick days, no shortcuts. If you slack, the whole family eats less, and your husband's temper flares. You're not just a wife or mother, you're the backbone of this house, even if no one says it. The shawl's your only armor, draped over your head when the neighbor's husband leers or when you pass the tavern's rowdy drunks. It's not much, but it's a shield. Here's a quirky tidbit: some women chewed parsley to freshen their breath before church, believing it hid the stink of last night's onion stew. Spoiler, it didn't. You try it anyway, spitting green flecks into the grass, then laugh at your own desperation. Historians still argue whether these home remedies were clever or just placebo. Either way, you're stuck smelling like a garden. By noon, you're at the bakehouse, sharing an oven with 3 other women. They gossip about a runaway bride who fled to a nunnery. You crack a joke about her dodging a worse fate marriage, and they snicker, but their eyes dart nervously. Freedom's a dangerous word. The loom's your nemesis now. You sit, hunched, weaving cloth for clothes you'll never have time to wear. Your fingers fumble, and the thread snaps. Again, you're supposed to be perfect, modest, diligent, silent, but perfection's a trap. The shawl slips, and a strand of hair escapes, catching the sunlight. For a moment, you feel human, not just a cog in the village machine. But then a child screams outside, and you're back to reality, dousing a cooking fire that's gone rogue. Your husband grumbles about the bread being too hard, and you bite your tongue. If you snap back, the whole village will talk. Every task binds you tighter to this life. You're not allowed to dream of more, not openly. Anyway, the shawl's hem is unraveling now, like your patience. But you tuck the loose threads inside, just like your thoughts. You kneel at Vespers, the church's stone floor numbing your knees, and pray for strength, not for miracles. Just enough grit to face tomorrow. The priest drones on about obedience, and you stifle a smirk. Does he know you hid an extra egg for yourself today? Small rebellions keep you sane. As dusk falls, you're bone-tired, but there's no rest. You mend a torn tunic by candlelight, the shawl around your shoulders, its lavender sprig long since crumbled. You're surviving, but at what cost? The village is a cage, and marriage might be the lock. You hear a woman's voice outside, bargaining for her daughter's betrothal, and your stomach twists. That's your future, or worse, your daughter's. What happens when you're pushed into a marriage you can't escape? The shawl's draped over your shoulders, its frayed edges brushing your arms as you knead dough in a dim kitchen. The village is alive with chatter, but you're focused on the weight of a new reality: marriage. You're not just a woman, now you're a wife, or about to be, and that's a deal with no escape clause. The air smells of yeast and smoke, and your hands tremble, not from the cold, but from the thought of what's coming. That shawl, your constant companion, feels heavier today, like it's soaking up your dread. You tuck a loose thread inside, hiding your fear the way you hide everything else. Marriage in medieval times isn't about love, it's a contract, and you're the bargaining chip. A mainstream fact: most women were married by 15, often to men twice their age, chosen by their fathers for land, status, or alliances. You're 14 maybe, and your father's already eyeing a grizzled farmer with a decent field. You've seen him, his teeth like old gravestones, his temper worse. You try to argue, but your voice is a whisper against tradition. The shawl's your shield as you walk past his hut, head down, avoiding his stare. Your property now, and the village expects you to play the part. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some brides wore garlic wreaths in their hair, believing it warded off evil spirits on their wedding night. You try it, and the stench makes you gag. Evil spirits might flee, but so will everyone else. You joke to your sister about smelling like a stew, and she laughs, but her eyes are scared too. Historians still argue whether these rituals were superstition or a way to claim some control in a powerless moment. Either way, you're stuck with the garlic and the groom, the wedding's a blur-rough wine, forced smiles, and a priest muttering Latin. You're handed over like a sack of grain, and the shawl's the only thing that feels like yours. Your new husband expects obedience, labor, and heirs, in that order. You cook his meals, mend his clothes, and bite back retorts when he criticizes your stew. The village women nod approvingly. But you see the cracks in their faces. Marriages like theirs grind souls to dust. You're trapped, legally and socially. If you run, you're a criminal. If you stay, you're a servant. The shawl's lavender sprig is gone now, its faint scent replaced by sweat and despair. But you're not just a victim, you're clever. You start small, hiding a coin from the market, slipping extra bread to your sister. You overhear the men talk about dowries and alliances. And you realize this marriage isn't just about you, it's about power. Maybe you can play that game. You smile sweetly at your husband, but your mind's spinning. The shawl's a disguise now, cloaking your defiance. You crack a joke to the baker about your husband snoring, and she winks. Women share secrets like these, tiny sparks of resistance. Nights are the hardest. You lie beside a man you barely know, his breath sour, his hands rough. The shawl's folded nearby, a reminder of who you were before this. You dream of running to a city, a nunnery, anywhere but here. But morning comes, and you're back to chores, the village watching your every move. The priest preaches about wifely duty, and you stifle a laugh. Does he know you swapped his holy water with ale once you're surviving? But the cage is tightening. As you scrub pots by the stream, the shawl snags on a branch, tearing a new hole. You don't fix it, not yet. That tears a promise to yourself you'll find a way to outsmart this trap. But the next challenge is looming, darker and deadlier than marriage. What's it like when childbirth turns into a gamble with death? You're stirring a pot of barley pottage, the shawl loose around your neck, its torn hem dangling like a silent rebellion. Your husband's out in the fields, but the village buzzes with whispers your belly's starting to show. Pregnancy isn't just a milestone, it's a roll of the dice with your life on the line. The shawl's your comfort now, pulled tight as you wince through a cramp. That faint lavender scent is long gone, replaced by the tang of fear. You're not just carrying a child, you're carrying the weight of a world that sees you as a vessel, not a person. Childbirth in medieval times is a battlefield, and you're walking into it blind. A mainstream fact: about 1 in 5 women die during or after childbirth, often from infection or hemorrhage with no hospitals or painkillers. You've heard the stories, women screaming through the night, midwives praying as blood soaks the straw. Your neighbor lost her sister last spring, and the memory haunts you. The shawl's your anchor as you visit the midwife, a gruff woman with hands like leather. She mutters about herbs and charms, but her eyes don't lie. There's no guarantee you'll survive this. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some midwives used a birthing girdle, a parchment inscribed with prayers tied around the mother's waist to ease labor. You clutch one, the ink smudged, and joke to yourself, it's about as useful as a sieve in a storm. It's something, though, so you keep it close. Historians still argue whether these girdles were spiritual comfort or just desperate superstition. Either way, you're not picky. You need all the help you can get. The months crawl by. You're heavier, slower, but the chores don't stop. You haul water, Knead dough and ignore the village gossips who eye your swollen belly like it's their business. Your husband's no help. He grumbles about needing a son, as if you control the outcome. You snap back once, and he glares. The shawl hides your clenched fists. You're expected to be meek, but meekness won't save you when labor hits. You've seen the churchyard, dotted with tiny graves babies who didn't make it, mothers who didn't either. The odds are brutal, and you're scared. You try to prepare. You barter for extra linen. Stockpile nettle tea the midwife swears by. The shawl's your cloak now, flung over your shoulders as you waddle to church. The priest drones about Eve's sin, and you roll your eyes. Does he think labor's not punishment enough? You crack a joke to the baker's wife about naming the baby after the priest just to curse it. And she snorts. Laughter's your defiance, a spark in the dark. Nights are restless. You lie awake, the shawl bunched under your head, imagining the pain to come. You've heard of women who survived multiple births, but they're the exception. The midwife's tools, knives, herbs, a rusty needle aren't exactly reassuring. You whisper to the child inside you, promising to fight for both of you. The shawl's tear is wider now, but you don't mend it. It's a reminder you're not giving up, no matter the odds. Labor looms like a storm. You're not just fighting for your life. You're fighting a system that binds you to this role. The village expects you to produce heirs, but they won't mourn you if you fall. As you rub your belly, the shawl slips, and you feel a kick. It's a spark of hope, but hope's dangerous in a world this cruel. How do you navigate a society that chains you at every turn? Woman waking on a straw mattress in a smoky hut, clutching her threadbare russet shawl, pigs snorting outside, dawn light through a shutter, weary expression late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman hauling water from a splintered well, shawl snagging on a wooden bucket, village huts and muddy pigs in the background, morning mist, determined grimace late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman kindling a fire in a dim hut, kneeling by a hearth with iron fire tongs, shawl draped over shoulders, roosters crowing outside, focused expression late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman kneading dough on a wooden table, cracked hands dusted with flour, shawl tied at waist, smoky interior with straw-strewn floor, morning light, strained effort, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman scrubbing pots with sand in a hut, shawl slipping off shoulder, wicker basket of pots nearby, dim candlelight, exhausted slump, late 15th century illuminated manuscript, miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman trudging to market, shawl wrapped tightly, carrying a wicker basket of eggs, muddy village path, harvest sun, toothless crone muttering in a corner, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman bartering eggs for salt in a chaotic village square, shawl hiding her face, wilted cabbages and apple-stealing kids around, butcher leering in a corner, wary expression late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman mending clothes with a bone needle, shawl over lap, sitting on a bench in a hut, soft daylight through a window, focused frown, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman churning butter in a wooden churn, shawl tied back, sweat on brow, hut interior with straw floor, midday light, weary determination, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman chasing scrawny chickens in a muddy yard, shawl flapping, wooden bucket kicked over, village huts in background, harvest sun, frustrated scowl, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman joking with neighbor about her gout, shawl loosely draped, sitting on a stool outside a hut, neighbor cackling in a corner, noon sunlight, rare smirk late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman walking to church, shawl overhead for modesty, muddy path with looming church shadow, priest glaring in a corner, subdued expression late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman kneeling on cold church stone, shawl slipping off shoulder, hands clasped in prayer, dim candlelight, priest in a corner, conflicted gaze, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman standing in village square at dusk, shawl fraying at hem, staring at distant fields, weary but defiant spark in eyes, soft ochre sunset, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman tucking a lavender sprig into her shawl, sitting on a hut bench, dim firelight casting shadows, village silent outside, quiet hope in expression late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman wrestling with a loom in a dim hut, hands rough as tree bark, shawl catching on a splinter, dawn light filtering through a shutter, weary frustration late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman hauling firewood outside a hut, shawl fraying as it snags, village carts creaking in the background, morning mist, grim determination, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman sweeping dirt floors in a smoky interior, shawl draped over shoulders, wooden bucket nearby, dim candlelight, focused effort, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman churning cream into butter in a hut, shawl tied at waist, straw-strewn floor, noon light, strained exhaustion, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman scrubbing linens in a cold stream, shawl shielding her face from leering men, village huts in the distance, harvest sun, tense vigilance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman chewing parsley in a grassy yard, shawl overhead, spitting green flecks, morning light, self-mocking laugh late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman at a bakehouse oven, shawl slipping, sharing space with three gossiping women in a corner. Noon sunlight, nervous amusement, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman hunched at a loom, thread snapping, shawl slipping to reveal a strand of hair. Dim hut interior, fleeting hope, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman dousing a rogue cooking fire outside. Shawl flapping, child screaming in a corner, smoky village air. Startled focus, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman kneeling on cold church stone at vespers, shawl around shoulders. Priest droning in a corner, subdued defiance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman mending a torn tunic by candlelight in a hut, shawl with crumbled lavender sprig, dusk shadows. Bone-tired resignation, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman hearing a mother bargaining for betrothal outside. Shawl tight around shoulders. Village dusk, fading. Anxious dread, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman spinning wool at a loom in a hut, shawl catching on wooden frame. Early morning light, weary persistence, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman scrubbing linens by a stream, shawl shielding from tavern drunks in a corner. Midday sun, tense endurance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman praying at vespers, shawl slipping, church stone floor. Priest in a corner. Quiet rebellion, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman kneading dough in a dim kitchen, shawl draped over shoulders with frayed edges. Village chatter outside. Trembling dread, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman walking past a grizzled farmer's hut, shawl shielding her face, head down. Village path under harvest sun. Fearful submission, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman wearing a garlic wreath in her hair, joking with sister in a grassy yard, shawl over shoulders. Morning light, self-mocking humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman handed over at a wedding, shawl clutched tightly. Priest muttering Latin in a corner, rough wine on table. Forced resignation, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman cooking meals in a smoky hut, shawl draped, mending clothes with a bone needle. Village women nodding in a corner. Weary endurance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman hiding a coin in a dim hut, shawl cloaking defiance, smiling sweetly at husband in a corner, market basket nearby. Sly Determination, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman joking with baker about husband snoring, shawl loosely draped, baker winking in a corner, village square under noon sun, subtle resistance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman lying beside husband at night, shawl folded nearby, his rough hands visible, dim candlelight, silent despair. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman dreaming by candlelight in a hut, shawl beside her. Village huts faintly outside, midnight shadows. Fleeting hope, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman scrubbing pots by a stream, shawl snagging on a branch with a new tear. Village women in a corner, midday light. Quiet resolve, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman kneeling at church, shawl slipping. Priest preaching in a corner, stone floor. Stifled amusement, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman mending clothes in a hut, shawl with no lavender sprig. Candlelight, village silence outside. Exhausted perseverance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman walking past tavern drunks, shawl overhead, village path under dusk light. Tense vigilance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman spinning wool at a loom, shawl catching on wooden frame. Dim morning light. Weary focus, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman cooking stew in a smoky hut, shawl shielding from husband's criticism in a corner. Iron fire tongs nearby. Resigned silence, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman stirring barley pottage in a smoky kitchen, shawl loose around neck with torn hem. Village whispers outside, trembling fear, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman wincing through a cramp in a hut, shawl pulled tight. Midwife with leather hands muttering in a corner. Dim candlelight, anxious dread, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman clutching a smudged birthing girdle, joking to herself in a grassy yard, shawl over shoulders. Morning mist, self-mocking humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman hauling water with a swollen belly, shawl draped. Village gossips in a corner. Harvest sun. Weary defiance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman kneading dough in a hut, shawl hiding clenched fists. husband glaring in a corner, smoky interior. Tense resistance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman bartering for linen by a stream. Shawl flung over shoulders. Wooden bucket nearby. Midday light. Cautious hope, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman waddling to church with nettle tea, shawl as cloak, priest droning in a corner, soft daylight, eye-rolling amusement, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman joking with baker's wife about baby names, shawl slipping, baker's wife snorting in a corner, village square, defiant laughter, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman lying awake at night. Shawl bunched under head. Husband's silhouette in a corner. Dim candlelight. Restless fear. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman whispering to her belly. Shawl with wider tier. Midwife's rusty tools in a corner. Midnight shadows. Quiet resolve. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman rubbing her belly by a hearth. Shawl slipping. Village huts faintly outside. Warm firelight. Hopeful determination. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman hauling water with a swollen belly. Shawl draped. Gossips whispering in a corner. Morning mist. Weary endurance. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman kneading dough in a smoky hut. Shawl tied around neck. Husband grumbling in a corner. Noon light. Strained silence. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman visiting midwife with shawl as shield. Herbs on table. Leather-handed midwife in a corner. Dim interior. Anxious anticipation. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman stirring pottage with iron fire tongs. Shawl torn and dangling. Village chatter outside. Dusk light. Resigned strength late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman trudging through village. Shawl tight against biting wind. Tender belly. Tavern men laughing in a corner. Defiant spark late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman clenching shawl. Watching blacksmith's wife grovel near a hut. Village path under harvest sun. Fearful resignation. Late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman stirring mandrake potion in a dim hut. Shawl hiding vial, joking to herself. Iron fire tongs nearby. Sly humor late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman bartering at market. shawl cloaking curiosity, slipping apple to child, merchant distracted in a corner, cunning nod, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman mimicking priest's tone to baker's wife, shawl loosely draped, baker cackling in a corner, village square, mocking amusement, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman bowing to lord's men near manor, shawl shielding scowl, village huts in background, midday light, gridded defiance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman hiding wool scraps under floorboard in hut, shawl as disguise, dim candlelight, hopeful determination, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman mending clothes by firelight, shawl draped, husband barking in a corner, night shadows, weary resilience, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman joking about lord's hat in hut, shawl over shoulders, wicker basket nearby, warm firelight, petty humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman kneeling at church, shawl slipping, neighbor whispering in a corner, stone floor, quiet intrigue, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman trudging past tavern, shawl tight, village men in a corner, dusk light, tense vigilance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman listening to travelers near market, shawl cloaking curiosity, wooden bucket nearby, morning mist, attentive focus, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman hauling water with shawl, village huts in background, harvest sun, weary endurance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman stirring pottage in smoky hut, shawl torn, husband silhouette in a corner, noon light, resigned strength, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman praying at church, shawl slipping, priest droning in a corner, dim candlelight, conflicted hope, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman kneeling in village church, shawl bunched around shoulders with torn hem, priest droning in a corner, incense-filled air, wrestling doubt, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman gripping shawl overhead, walking to morning mass, village huts under harvest sun, fearful obedience, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman clutching a holy relic pouch and shawl, joking to herself in a dim hut, wooden bucket nearby, dim candlelight, self-mocking humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman praying after bad harvest, shawl clutched tightly, church interior with stone floor, evening shadows, desperate hope, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman mimicking priest's sermon to miller's wife, shawl loosely draped, miller's wife, stifling laugh in a corner, village square, sly amusement, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman slipping coin to beggar outside church, shawl hiding smirk, priest in a corner, midday light, quiet defiance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman sitting by firelight, mending sock with shawl on lap, village silence outside, night warmth, weary resilience, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman whispering prayer in church, shawl slipping, priest droning in a corner, dim candlelight, conflicted submission, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman leaving church with shawl caught on pew, torn further, village huts in background, dusk light, silent resolve, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman kneeling at vespers, shawl overhead, church stone floor, priest in a corner, subdued neutrality, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman praying after child's fever, shawl clutched, church interior, morning mist, anxious hope, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman walking past shamed woman with cut hair, shawl shielding eyes, village path, harvest sun, fearful sympathy, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman joking about priest's sermon in hut, shawl draped, iron fire tongs nearby, warm firelight, petty humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman clutching shawl at church, priest lecturing in a corner, stone floor, noon light, tense obedience, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman mending clothes in dim hut, shawl with torn hem, village silence outside, night shadows, resigned strength, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman slogging through village, shawl tight against damp chill, torn edges, muddy, barren fields under gray sky, desperate hope, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman bartering egg for bread at market, shawl hiding trembling hands, merchant pitying in a corner, morning mist, weary resilience, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman hanging onions on door, joking in a dim hut, shawl draped, iron fire tongs nearby, self-mocking humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman weaving through village, shawl draped with ragged tear flapping, tavern men shouting in a corner, damp chill, quiet defiance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman flashing hand sign to baker's wife at market, shawl hiding hands, merchant nosy in a corner, morning mist, sly amusement late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman kneading dough at dawn, shawl pulled tight, woman whispering about healer in a corner, dim hut light, tense resolve, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman hurrying through village, shawl clutched tight with gaping tear, crowd muttering about healer in a corner, autumn chill, nervous defiance, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman checking skin in dark hut, shawl around shoulders with toad bone amulet, priest preaching in a corner, night shadows, paranoid fear, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman hauling water at dawn, shawl snagging on fence with wider tear, lord's men eyeing in a corner, dim light, tense resolve, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman slipping through village, shawl loose with ragged tear swaying, market crowd whispering in a corner, autumn chill, daring hope late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman bartering with brewer at market, shawl hiding nervous hands, brewer sizing up in a corner, morning mist, sly ambition late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman stitching by firelight, shawl across knees, husband asleep in a corner, night warmth, quiet determination, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture. Woman trudging through village, shawl barely clinging with wide tear flapping, lord's men in a corner, autumn chill, gritty resolve, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman teaching baker's wife to haggle at market, shawl hiding smirk, men grumbling in a corner, morning mist, sly pride, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman rubbing luckstone by low fire, shawl across lap, husband snoring in a corner, night shadows. Weary humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman standing in village at dawn, shawl's shredded remains draped over shoulders, church bells soft in background, reflective strength, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature, tempera and shell gold on vellum, flat medieval perspective, fine brown ink outlines, subtle parchment texture, woman tying shawl remnants around waist, joking with baker's wife near church, straw cross above door, morning light, Wry humor, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. Woman by quiet stream. Shawl fallen apart on ground. Gentle breeze and fading firelight. Peaceful resolve, late 15th century illuminated manuscript miniature. Tempera and shell gold on vellum. Flat medieval perspective. Fine brown ink outlines. Subtle parchment texture. You're kneeling in the village church, the shawl bunched around your shoulders, its frayed edges brushing the cold stone floor. The air's thick with incense and murmurs, but your mind's wrestling with faith, your only solace in this brutal world. Yet another chain. The priest's voice drones, preaching submission, and you grip the shawl, its torn hem a silent protest. You're supposed to find peace here, but the rules of religion feel like a trap, binding your soul as tightly as society binds your body. That lavender sprig you once tucked inside is long gone, but the shawl still holds your secrets, doubts you'd never dare speak. Religion rules medieval life, especially for women. A mainstream fact, the Catholic Church dictated morality, marriage, and even your daily schedule, with women expected to embody purity and obedience. You're in church daily mornings for Mass, evenings for Vespers, because skipping risks gossip or worse. A visit from the priest. Deaf dear. You've seen women shamed for less, their hair cut, their names cursed. The shawl's your shield, pulled over your head to signal modesty. But it can't hide the questions burning inside. Is faith your strength, or just another lord to serve? Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women carried holy relics, bits of bone or cloth tied in pouches, believing they'd protect against evil or ensure a safe birth. You've got one, a scrap said to be from a saint's veil. And you joke it's probably just old rags from the priest's laundry. It's tucked in the shawl, more for comfort than belief. Historians still argue whether relics were spiritual tools or scams by cunning clergy either way. You're not tossing it out. You lean on faith when life's unbearable. After a bad harvest or a child's fever, you pray, clutching the shawl, hoping for miracles. The church offers hope heaven, forgiveness, but it demands your silence. Women can't preach or question doctrine. You're to nod and obey. You see the contradiction, the Virgin Mary's exalted, but real women are scolded for speaking. You mimic the priest's sermon to the miller's wife, exaggerating his nasal whine, and she stifles a laugh. Humors your rebellion, a spark in the gloom. But faith cages you too. The church says your suffering's God's will, your husband's temper, your endless chores, your risks in childbirth. You're told to accept it, but you don't. You slip an extra coin to a beggar outside church, defying the priest's greed. The shawl hides your smirk as you pass him, his robes fancier than your entire wardrobe. You've heard of women finding freedom in convents, but that's a rare path most are for noble ladies, not peasants like you. Still you dream, the shawl a cloak for your dangerous thoughts. Nights are quiet, save for the crackling fire. You sit, mending a sock, the shawl draped over your lap. You crack a joke to yourself about the priest's sermons being long enough to knit a whole blanket. Small laughs keep you grounded. But faith's grip tightens. You're expected to confess every sin, even thoughts of defiance. You whisper a half-hearted prayer, wondering if God sees your struggle or just your faults. As you leave church, the shawl catches on a pew, tearing further. You don't fix it, not yet. It's a sign you're still fighting, even if faith feels like a double-edged sword. The village is crumbling under new threats: disease, hunger, and survival's about to get uglier. How do you keep going when plague and poverty strike? You're slogging through the village, the shawl wrapped tight against a damp chill, its torn edges soaked with mud. The air's heavy with rot plague's shadow looms, and poverty's grip is tighter than ever. Your stomach growls as you pass barren fields, the harvest too meager to feed everyone. The shawl's your lifeline, cloaking you from prying eyes as you scavenge for anything edible nettles. Maybe, or a stray turnip. Its frayed hem drags, heavier now, like your hope. But you keep moving. Survival's a fight, and you're not giving up, even in a world that's crumbling. Plague and poverty define this era. A mainstream fact, the Black Death, peaking around 1348, killed up to half of Europe's population, and women, often caregivers, faced higher risks. You've seen it, neighbors coughing, their skin blotched, gone in days. Poverty's just as deadly. Taxes and failed crops leave your village starving, and you're expected to stretch nothing into meals. The shawl hides your trembling hands as you barter a single egg for a scrap of bread, dodging the merchant's pitying stare. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some believed tying onions to their doors kept plague away, thinking the smell repelled bad air. You try it, hanging a string of bulbs, and joke it might scare off your husband's temper too. It doesn't work, but the absurdity lifts your mood. Historians still argue whether these remedies were folklore or desperate coping mechanisms. Either way, you're not banking on onions. You dodge disease by instinct. You avoid the sick, boil water when you can, and wrap the shawl over your mouth in crowded markets. But poverty's harder to escape. Your husband's surly, blaming you for thin soups, as if you conjured the drought. You snap back once, and he looms. The shawl hides your fear. You're the family's anchor, cooking, nursing, scavenging, while men drink away their despair. You slip a crust to a skeletal child, ignoring the village's rule to look out for your own. The church offers prayers, but no food. You kneel, the shawl slipping, and mutter for strength, not miracles. The priest's sermons about God's wrath feel hollow when your neighbor's baby dies. You crack a joke to the weaver about the priest's fat belly, proving he's not starving. She smirks, but fear quiets her. You're all on edge. Plague rumors spread, and the village shuns outsiders. You hear of mass graves, bodies stacked like firewood, and shudder. You fight to survive. You dry herbs for winter, mend nets for fishing, and hide a few coins under a stone. The shawl's your partner, flung over your head when tax collectors prowl. You've learned to read the sky clouds mean rain, maybe mushrooms to forage, but every choice is a gamble. If you nurse a sick friend, you risk infection. If you don't, you're heartless. The shawl's tear is a gaping wound now, but you wear it like armor. Nights are cold, the fire weak. You huddle under the shawl, mending a torn sack, whispering to yourself about better days. A cough from the next hut jolts you, plague or just dust. You can't tell. Survival's not enough anymore. You want a voice, a way to fight back against this world's cruelty. What happens when you're silenced, but rebellion stirs inside? You're weaving through the village, the shawl draped over your shoulders, its ragged tear flapping like a flag of quiet defiance. The world's a man's game. Your voice doesn't count. Your thoughts are dismissed, and every step you take is watched. But something's stirring inside you, a spark of rebellion that won't stay buried. The shawl's your mask, hiding the glint in your eyes as you pass the tavern, where men shout and women are ghosts. Its muddy, frayed edges brush your hands, a reminder you're still here, still fighting, even if no one sees it. In medieval society, women were voiceless. A mainstream fact: you couldn't speak in court, vote in village councils, or challenge a man's word. Your role was to serve, not to be heard. You've seen it, a widow's plea for her land ignored, a girl's accusation laughed off. The shawl's your shield as you linger near the market, catching snippets of men's talk taxes, wars, power. You're invisible to them, but you're listening, learning. Silence is your cage, but it's also your weapon. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women use secret hand signs to share warnings or gossip. a hidden language men didn't notice. You try it, flashing a quick gesture to the baker's wife about a nosy merchant. She nods, and you both stifle grins. It's small, but it feels like power. Historians still argue whether these signs were widespread or just local tricks. Either way, you're hooked. The shawl hides your hands as you practice, weaving defiance into every move. You're done being a shadow. You start small, slipping an extra loaf to a hungry neighbor, whispering advice to a battered wife when men aren't looking. At church, you bow your head, but the shawl can't hide your smirk when the priest rambles about obedience. You mimic his voice later, joking to the miller's daughter that he sounds like a sick goat. She laughs, and for a moment, you're not alone. Rebellion's risky gossip could brand you a troublemaker, but you're tired of shrinking. The village council meets, and you're barred, as always. You hover outside, the shawl pulled tight, catching words about new taxes. You can't speak, but you act. You spread word to other women, hide your best grain, dodge the collector. It's dangerous, but it works. The shawl's your cloak, cloaking your nerve as you pass the Lord's men. You've heard of women who defied more herbalists who led secret meetings, but they're rare, and you're no healer. Still, you dream, tucking plans under the shawl like contraband. Nights are tense. Your husband's drunk again, yelling about your laziness. You clench the shawl, biting back words that could earn a bruise. You crack a joke to yourself about his breath outstinking the pigs. It's petty, but it keeps you steady. You're not just surviving now, you're plotting. You carve a tiny mark under a table, a secret tally of your small wins. The shawl's falling apart, but you wear it proudly, its tear a badge of your refusal to break. As you knead dough at dawn, a woman whispers about a healer accused of witchcraft. Fear grips you, but so does resolve. Silence isn't safety, it's surrender. You're ready to risk more, even if it means facing a new kind of danger. What happens when a single misstep could brand you a witch? You're hurrying through the village, the shawl clutched tight, its gaping tear exposing your arm to the autumn chill. Whispers of witchcraft swirl like smoke. Any woman who steps out of line risks the label, and you're treading dangerously close. The shawl's your disguise, hiding the pulse in your throat as you pass a crowd muttering about a healer's arrest. Its muddy, tattered edges are a mirror of your nerves, but you keep your head down, blending into the gray of the village. You're not just fighting for survival now, you're dodging a noose. Witch hunts were a medieval nightmare, a mainstream fact by the late Middle Ages. Thousands of women were accused of witchcraft, often for knowing herbs or defying men, with trials relying on gossip or torture. You've seen the fear women shunned, homes burned. The shawl's your shield as you skirt the church, where the priest preaching purged the devil. You're no healer, but your small rebellion's hiding grain. Sharing secret signs could be enough to damn you. One wrong word, and you're done. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women wore amulets of toad bones, believing they deflect accusations of witchcraft. You've got one, a tiny thing tied in the shawl's folds. And you joke it's more likely to attract flies than save you. Historians still argue whether these charms were superstition or a way to feel control in a paranoid world. Either way, you're not betting your life on a frog. You keep it, though, a small act of defiance. You move carefully. You avoid speaking too loudly. Stop flashing hand signs. The baker's wife warns you a neighbor's been questioned for brewing fever tea. You nod, the shawl hiding your clenched jaw. You're expected to be meek, but meekness won't save you if the village turns. You stop sharing extra bread. Keep your head low at market, but silence chokes you. You crack a joke to the miller's daughter about the priest's sermon sounding like a witch's curse quietly, so no one hears. Her nervous giggle is a lifeline. The village is a tinderbox, a bad harvest, a sick cow. Anything can spark blame, and women are the easiest targets. You've heard of tests dunking in rivers, searching for devil's marks. You check your skin in the dark, the shawl around you, paranoid about a mole. You're not a witch, but truth doesn't matter when fear rules. You hide your wool stash, stop whispering advice. The shawl's your cloak, flung over your head when the Lord's men ride through, eyeing every woman like prey. Nights are sleepless. You sit by the fire, the shawl across your lap, mending a sock to steady your hands. Your husband snoring, oblivious to the danger. You joke to yourself his snores could wake the devil himself. It's a weak laugh, but it helps. You carve another mark under the table, a tally of days you've stayed safe. The church looms, its bells a warning. You pray, but it's hollow. God feels far when a neighbor's screams echo from the jail. As you haul water at dawn, the shawl snags on a fence, tearing wider. You don't fix it, it's your badge, proof you're still here. But you hear of women who've escaped this fate, bending rules in ways you never imagined. Could you find that courage? What happens when you discover rare paths to power? You're slipping through the village, the shawl loose around your shoulders, its ragged tier swaying like a whispered dare. The witch hysteria's a constant hum. But you're starting to hear stories of women who bend the rules, women who carve out slivers of power in a world built to crush them. The shawl's your cover, hiding the spark in your eyes as you linger near the market, catching tales of cunning midwives and sharp-tongued widows. Its frayed edges are caked with dirt, but you wear it like a crown, proof you're still fighting. You're not just surviving, you're hunting for a way to matter. In medieval Europe, power for women was rare, but not impossible. A mainstream fact, some women gained influence as abbesses, merchants' wives, or even spies, using wit to navigate a man's world. You're no noble, but you see it a weaver who trades secrets for coin, a brewer who sways the tavern's talk. The shawl's your cloak as you approach the brewer, asking sly questions about her deals. She sizes you up, then nods. Your learning power isn't given, it's taken, one careful step at a time. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women hid messages in embroidery, stitching coded patterns to share plans or warnings. You try it, pricking your finger on a needle, and joke your clumsy stitches might just confess your sins instead. It's a small thrill, threading rebellion into cloth. Historians still argue whether these embroideries were practical or symbolic either way. You tuck the needle in the shawl, a tiny weapon. You're not ready to stitch secrets, but you're watching, learning how to play the game. You test the waters. You barter harder at market, slipping a coin to a traveler for news of distant cities. You mimic the brewer's confident tone when haggling, the shawl hiding your nervous hands. The village men don't notice, but the women do. The baker's wife asks to learn your tricks. You share a tip, feeling a flicker of pride. You're still voiceless in the council, but you're building allies. You crack a joke about the Lord's new tax being dumber than his horse. She laughs, and it's a bond. Small moves, big risks. The church is still a cage. The priest glares when you linger too long, and you pull the shawl tighter, playing meek, but you're done bowing to fear. You visit the weaver, who hints at a network women trading goods under the men's noses. You offer your wool stash, and she accepts. It's dangerous. If caught, you're a thief, or worse, a witch. The shawl's your shield, flung over your head when the Lord's men pass. You're not leading rebellions, but you're part of something bigger, a quiet web of defiance. Nights are electric. You sit by the fire, the shawl across your knees, stitching a simple pattern practice, not a code yet. Your husband's asleep, clueless. You joke to yourself his snores could guide ships in fog. It keeps you steady. You carve another mark under the table, a tally of your growing nerve. The village feels smaller now, the world wider. You're not free, but you're closer than ever. As you haul firewood at dawn, the shawl catches on a branch, tearing further. You leave it, each rips a step towards something new. You're finding ways to thrive, but the fight's far from over. What's the secret to enduring when the odds are stacked against you? You're trudging through the village, the shawl barely clinging to your shoulders, its tattered tear now a wide gash, flapping like a battle scar. You've dodged plague, witch hunts, and society's chains, finding small ways to thrive, bartering smarter, stitching secrets, building allies. But the odds are still stacked against you, and every day's a test of how much you can endure. The shawl's your banner, filthy and torn, but it holds your grit, your refusal to break. You wrap it tighter, ignoring the cold, and keep moving. Survival's not enough. You're carving out a life. Medieval women were masters of resilience, a mainstream fact despite legal and social barriers. Many women ran households, managed farms, or even smuggled goods, adapting to crises like famine or war. You're doing it too, hiding grain from taxmen, trading wool for candles, outsmarting the village's rules. The shawl's your partner, draped over your head when you slip past the Lord's men, your stash of coins tucked in its folds. You're not rich, but you're resourceful, turning scraps into something. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women kept luck stones, smooth pebbles carried for protection, believing they'd ward off bad fortune. You've got one, a gray stone in the shawl's hem, and you joke it's probably just a rock the river spat out. It's silly, but you rub it when fear creeps in. Historians still argue whether these stones were spiritual or just emotional crutches. Either way, it's yours, a small anchor in chaos. You thrive through cunning. You teach the baker's wife to haggle, share nettle soup with a widow, and whisper warnings about the tax collector's rounds. The shawl hides your smirk when you overhear men grumble about tricky women. You're still silent in their counsels, but your network grows. Women trading tips, goods, hope. You crack a joke to the miller's daughter about the priest's new robe looking like a peacock's mistake. She snorts, and it's a spark of joy. These bonds are your strength, invisible but iron. The village is harsh. Winter's coming, and food's scarce. Your husband's temper flares, blaming you for empty pots. You clench the shawl, dodging his anger, and slip out to forage. You find wild garlic, a small win. The church demands tithes, but you hide a sack of barley, risking punishment. You kneel at Mass, the shawl slipping, and pray for endurance, not miracles. You've heard of women who fled to cities or convents, but you're rooted here, fighting for your place. Nights are quiet, the fire low. You sit, the shawl across your lap, rubbing that luck stone. You joke to yourself about your husband's snores, rivaling a storm. It's a weak laugh, but it holds you steady. You carve another mark under the table, a tally of days you've outwitted the world. The shawl's barely cloth now, more holes than fabric, but it's you worn, defiant, enduring. As you haul water at dawn, the shawl snags, nearly falling apart. You tie it on anyway. You've survived this far, but looking back, you wonder how you did it and what it means for the women who came after you. How does your journey reveal the strength of medieval women? You're standing in the village, the shawl barely holding together, its shredded remains draped over your shoulders like a ghost of your journey. Each tear, each stain, tells your story, surviving marriage, childbirth, plague, and a world that tried to silence you. You've outsmarted the odds, built quiet alliances, and found ways to thrive where others broke. Now, as dawn paints the sky, you look back, marveling at the strength it took to endure. The shawl's your witness, tattered but unbroken. Just like you, you're not just a woman, you're a force, and so were countless others who walked this path. Medieval women's resilience was legendary, a mainstream fact despite oppression. Women shaped their communities, passing down skills like brewing, healing, and storytelling, often unrecorded by history. You've done it too, teaching, trading, surviving. The shawl's your legacy. Its threads woven with every small victory, the coin you hid, the joke you shared, the hope you gave. You tie its remnants around your waist, a final act of defiance against a world that underestimated you. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some women marked their homes with braided straw crosses, believing they brought blessings. You've got one, hung above your door, and you joke it's less holy than your stubborn will. Historians still argue whether these crosses were faith or folklore. Either way, it's yours, a nod to the women before you. Your strength echoes theirs, a chain of endurance stretching through time. You reflect on your journey. You've faced a husband's temper, a priest's judgment, a village's eyes, yet you've carved a place for yourself. You've shared bread, stitched secrets, and dreamed beyond these muddy streets. The shawl's final threads cling to you as you pass the church, its bells softer now. You crack a joke to the baker's wife about the priest's sermons outlasting winter. She laughs, and it's a sound of survival. You've built something, not with power, but with grit. As you haul your last bucket of water, the shawl falls apart, slipping to the ground. You don't pick it up. It's done its job, carrying you through. You stand taller, knowing you're part of a silent army, women who endured, whose strength history barely whispers. Your marks under the table, your allies. Your luck stone, their proof you were here. And you mattered. Now, let's slow down. Let the village fade. Picture yourself by a quiet stream, the water's gentle ripple blending with a soft breeze. Your shoulders ease, the weight of survival lifting. You've walked a hard path, but you're here, breathing, strong. Those women, their resilience lives in you, in every choice you make. Close your eyes. Feel the warmth of a fading fire, the hum of a distant lullaby. Did you remember the toad bone amulet, the straw cross? The signs you shared, they're little stars in your story, guiding you to rest. Let the world slip away, soft as a whisper, and drift into peace. Sleep deep, knowing you're tougher than the toughest storms.